story. The water ran cold over her bleeding knuckles, and Sarah Mitchell wondered if this night would ever end, scrubbing the blood-stained sheets from the boarding house in the Rio Grande at midnight while most decent folks slept. She'd been working since 4 that morning, cooking breakfast for 12 boarders, cleaning their rooms, washing their clothes, mending their torn shirts, and now here she was at the river's edge with the moon casting silver shadows across the water. The town of Del Rio, Texas sat quiet behind her, most windows dark except for the saloons that never seemed to close. It was August of 1882, and the heat had been relentless all day, but Sarah had learned long ago that the coolest time to do laundry was after the sun went down. The river stones bit into her knees through her worn skirt as she scrubbed another sheet against the washboard, her arms aching with a bone-deep exhaustion that had become as familiar to her as breathing. Sarah was 22 years old, though she felt ancient most days. Her mother had died 3 years ago from consumption, and her father had followed 6 months later, leaving Sarah with nothing but debts and a younger brother to raise. Tommy was 15 now, working at the livery stable, and between his meager wages and what she made at the boarding house, they managed to keep a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. Barely. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, the steady clip-clop of hooves on the dirt road that ran alongside the river. Sarah tensed, her hands stilling in the water. Midnight was no time for decent folk to be out, and she was alone and vulnerable. She reached for the knife she kept tucked in her boot, her fingers wrapping around the worn handle as she watched a tall figure on horseback emerge from the shadows. The rider pulled his horse to a stop about 20 feet from where she knelt, and Sarah could make out broad shoulders and a worn cowboy hat in the moonlight. He sat there for a moment just watching her, and she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Then he spoke, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "When do you ever rest yourself?" The question caught her so off guard that she almost dropped the knife. Of all the things she had expected, concern for her welfare was not among them. She squinted up at him, trying to make out his features in the darkness. "I rest when the work is done," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "What business is it of yours?" The cowboy swung down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. As he moved closer, Sarah could see him better. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and a face that was more weathered than handsome, though there was something compelling about the way he carried himself. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he had a rifle in a saddle holster on his horse. "I have been riding for 3 days straight," he said, stopping a respectful distance from her. "I saw your light, or rather I saw you working, and I thought to myself that I was tired. Then I realized you have probably been working longer than I have been riding. It made me feel ashamed of my own complaints." Sarah did not know what to make of him. She kept her hand on the knife, though she relaxed her grip slightly. "You should not be out here bothering women who are trying to work." "You are right," he agreed easily. "But I could not ride past without saying something. It does not seem right, a woman working herself to the bone while the rest of the world sleeps. The world does not stop turning just because it gets dark," Sarah said. She went back to scrubbing the sheet, though she kept him in her peripheral vision. "And bills do not pay themselves. If you have nothing useful to say, you can move along. I have got work to do." To her surprise, the cowboy walked over to his horse and began unsaddling it. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "My horse needs water and rest," he said. "And if you are going to be out here working, someone ought to keep watch. Del Rio is not the safest town after dark." Sarah wanted to tell him she did not need his protection, but the truth was she was always nervous washing laundry at night. There had been incidents, women bothered or worse, and she had taken to carrying the knife for good reason. Having someone stand guard, even a stranger, made her feel a bit safer, though she was not about to admit it. "Suit yourself," she muttered, turning her attention back to the laundry. They worked in silence for a while. Sarah scrubbing and rinsing while the cowboy tended to his horse, leading it down to the water to drink before hobbling it in a patch of grass nearby. Then he sat down on a large rock, his rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness around them. "My name is James Cordell," he said after a while. "Most people call me Cord," and Sarah hesitated, then decided there was no harm in giving him her name. Sarah Mitchell. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Mitchell, even under these strange circumstances." Despite herself, Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "These are not so strange for me. I am out here most nights." "Every night?" Cord sounded genuinely shocked. 4 or 5 nights a week, depending on how many boarders we have and how dirty they get. Men who work cattle or in the mines, they come in filthy. Blood, sweat, mud, you name it. It all has to be washed out. And you do this alone? I have got a brother, but he works at the livery from dawn until dusk. He needs his sleep. What about you? Do you not need sleep? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. I will sleep when I am dead, I suppose. Cord was quiet for a moment. That is a hard way to live. Nah, it is the only way I know. Sarah wrung out the sheet she had been working on and draped it over a bush to dry. She would collect it in the morning before the sun got too hot. What brings you to Del Rio, Mr. Cordell? Record, he corrected. I am looking for work. I heard there might be positions on some of the ranches around here. There might be, Sarah agreed. The Brennan Ranch is usually hiring. They run several thousand head of cattle. It is hard work, though. I am used to hard work, Cord said. I have been working cattle since I was 12 years old. My father had a small ranch up in Wyoming, but he sold it after my mother passed. I have been drifting since then, picking up work where I can find it. Sarah heard something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed her own. I am sorry about your mother. Nisi. Thank you. It has been 4 years now. I am sorry if I am keeping you from your work. No, one. You are not, Sarah said, and she realized she meant it. The conversation was actually making the work go faster, giving her something to focus on besides the ache in her arms and back. How long have you been traveling? Well, on and off for about 3 years. I worked a big ranch up in Montana for a while, but the winters there are brutal. I decided to head south, see if I could find something with a bit more sun and a bit less snow. Well, we have got plenty of sun here, Sarah said dryly. More than enough, some would say. Nan Cord chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to roll through the night air. I noticed that when I rode in this afternoon. Felt like I was being baked alive. They continued talking as Sarah worked through the pile of laundry. She learned that Cord was 26 years old, that he had 2 younger sisters who had married and settled in Colorado, and that he had a deep love for horses that bordered on obsession. He told her stories about breaking wild mustangs and riding through mountain passes, and Sarah found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and laughing at his more humorous tales. In turn, she told him about her life in Del Rio, about losing her parents and struggling to keep her brother fed and clothed. She told him about the boarding house and its eccentric owner, Mrs. Henderson, who had a good heart but a tendency to take on more boarders than they could reasonably manage. Cord listened with an attention that Sarah was not used to, asking thoughtful questions and seeming genuinely interested in her answers. By the time Sarah finished the last of the laundry, the moon had moved considerably across the sky. She stood up stiffly, her knees protesting, and began gathering the wet clothes to hang on the bushes. Without being asked, Cord stood and helped her, taking the heavy sheets and draping them carefully over branches. Thank you, Sarah said when they were finished. You did not have to do that. I know, Cord said, but it seemed like the right thing to do. Sarah picked up her empty basket and turned to look at him. In the moonlight, she could see his face more clearly now, the strong jaw and the kind eyes. He was not classically handsome, but there was something about him that drew her in, a quiet strength and gentleness that she had rarely encountered in men. "Where are you staying tonight?" she asked. "I was planning to make camp outside of town, or," Cord said, "save my money for when I really need it." Sarah hesitated, then made a decision that surprised even her. "Mrs. Henderson has got a room available. It is not much, but it is clean and comes with 2 meals a day. If you're looking for work, it would be easier to start your search in the morning after a good night's sleep." "I appreciate the offer," Cord said, "but I'm not sure I can afford it." "The first night is on me," Sarah said. "Consider it payment for standing guard." And Cord studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, thank you, Miss Mitchell. That is very kind of you." "Sarah," she said, "if I'm calling you Cord, you should call me Sarah." He smiled, and Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. She pushed the feeling away, focusing on the practical matter of getting back to the boarding house. Cord saddled his horse, and they walked together through the quiet streets of Del Rio, Sarah carrying her basket and Cord leading his horse beside her. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure on the edge of town, painted white though the paint was peeling in places. Sarah led Cord around to the small barn out back where the boarders who had horses could stable them. She showed him where to put his saddle and gear, then led him through the back door into the kitchen. The room was dark except for the dying embers in the cook stove. Sarah lit a lamp, and warm yellow light filled the space. The kitchen was clean but clearly well used, with a large table in the center and shelves lined with jars of preserves and sacks of flour and beans. "Wait here," Sarah said softly. "I will get the key to the room." She disappeared through a doorway and returned a few minutes later with a key and a blanket. "Room 6 upstairs, second door on the right. Breakfast is at 6, but I can set something aside for you if you want to sleep later." "6 is fine," Cord said, taking the key and blanket. "I am used to early mornings." "Good night, then," Sarah said. "Good night, Sarah, and thank you again." Cord headed upstairs, and Sarah stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to his footsteps overhead. She felt oddly reluctant to see him go, which was foolish. He was just a drifter passing through town, looking for work. She would probably never see him again after tomorrow. She shook her head at her own silliness and began preparing the dough for the morning's biscuits. She would only get a few hours of sleep before she had to be up again, but that was nothing new. She worked by lamplight, her hands moving through the familiar motions automatically while her mind wandered back to the conversation by the river. "When do you ever rest yourself?" The question echoed in her head as she covered the dough and set it aside to rise. When did she rest? She honestly could not remember the last time she had taken a full day off, the last time she had done something just for pleasure rather than necessity. It had been years, probably since before her mother got sick. Sarah finally made her way to her own small room on the ground floor, barely more than a closet with a narrow bed and a washstand. She undressed in the dark, too tired to bother with the lamp, and fell into bed still thinking about dark hair and kind eyes and a voice that asked questions no one else seemed to care about. She woke to the rooster crowing what felt like minutes later, though the faint light creeping through her window told her it was nearly dawn. Sarah dragged herself out of bed and dressed quickly, splashing cold water on her face to wake herself up. Her body ached from the previous day's work, but she ignored it. The aches were constant companions these days. In the kitchen, she stoked the fire in the cook stove and put on a large pot of coffee. Then she retrieved the dough she had prepared the night before and began shaping biscuits, working quickly and efficiently. By the time Mrs. Henderson shuffled into the kitchen, yawning and tying on her apron, Sarah had the biscuits in the oven and was frying bacon in a large cast-iron skillet. "Morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said. "Did you get any sleep at all?" "Enough," Sarah lied. "I put a man in room 6 last night. He's new in town looking for work. I told him the first night was on me." Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Did you now?" That is not like you, Sarah. Usually you are the one reminding me not to be too generous. He helped me at the river last night, Sarah explained. Stood guard while I finished the laundry. It seemed like the least I could do. Stood guard, did he? Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled with interest. Is he handsome? I did not notice, Sarah said, focusing very intently on the bacon. Oh, you noticed, Reeser, Mrs. Henderson said with a laugh. You have got a bit of color in your cheeks, which is more than I have seen in months. Well, good for you. It is about time you had something to smile about. Sarah wanted to protest that she was not smiling about anything, but Mrs. Henderson had already moved on to setting the table in the dining room. Sarah finished preparing breakfast, trying not to think about the fact that Cord would be coming down those stairs any minute. The boarders began filtering into the dining room right at 6 o'clock, a mix of ranch hands, miners, and travelers. Cord came down last, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. He caught Sarah's eye as he entered the dining room and gave her a small smile that made her heart do that fluttering thing again. She busied herself serving breakfast, bringing out platters of biscuits, bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. The men ate with the single-minded focus of people who did hard physical labor, barely talking as they shoveled food into their mouths. Sarah refilled coffee cups and brought out more biscuits, hyper-aware of Cord sitting at the far end of the table. When the meal was finished and the boarders had dispersed to their various jobs, Cord lingered behind, helping Sarah clear the table without being asked. Mrs. Henderson watched this with obvious approval before excusing herself to do some shopping. You do not have to help, Sarah said as Cord carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. I know, sir, he said, but I want to. Besides, it gives me a chance to ask you something. Nanny and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What? You mentioned the Brennan Ranch last night. Do you know how to get there? Sarah felt foolish for the disappointment that washed over her. Of course he wanted directions to the ranch. That was why he was in Del Rio. Yes, it is about 5 miles west of town. You follow the main road until you see a gate with a B brand on it. You cannot miss it. Thank you. Cord hesitated, then said, Would you like to ride out there with me? Sarah blinked. What? I thought maybe you could use a break from work. We could ride out to the ranch. I could inquire about a job, and then we could take the long way back. There's still plenty of morning left, and you said yourself you work every day. Surely you could take a few hours off. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had rooms to clean, laundry to collect from the river, vegetables to prepare for lunch. But something in Cord's expression made her pause. He looked hopeful, eager even, and Sarah realized with a start that he genuinely wanted her company. I do not have a horse, she said, which was not exactly a refusal. You can ride with me, Cord offered. My horse is strong enough to carry 2. Nan Sarah bit her lip, torn between duty and desire. The desire won. Let me tell Mrs. Hendersoner, she said. Mrs. Henderson was thrilled when Sarah asked for a few hours off, practically pushing her out the door and telling her not to hurry back. Sarah changed into her better dress, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes, and met Cord by the barn. He had his horse saddled and ready, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze. Cord mounted first, then reached down to help Sarah up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, very aware of how close she was to Cord, her arms wrapping around his waist to steady herself. Ready? He asked, looking back at her. Ready? Sarah confirmed. They rode out of town at an easy pace, the morning sun warming their backs. Sarah had not been on a horse in years, and she had forgotten how wonderful it felt to move through the landscape like this, the rhythm of the horse's gait beneath her and the wind in her hair. Cord was a confident rider, guiding the horse with subtle shifts of his weight and quiet commands. Sarah found herself relaxing against his back, enjoying the solid warmth of him and the way he seemed so at ease in the saddle. They did not talk much during the ride, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Sarah watched the landscape roll by, the scrubby mesquite and prickly pear cactus, the occasional windmill spinning slowly in the breeze. It was beautiful in its own harsh way. This land she called home. The Brennan Ranch was impressive, with a large house, several barns, and extensive corrals. Cord rode up to the main house and dismounted, helping Sarah down before tying his horse to the hitching post. "Wait here," he said. "I will be right back." Sarah sat on the porch steps while Cord knocked on the door. A grizzled older man answered, and Sarah recognized him as Hank Brennan, the ranch foreman. She could hear the murmur of their conversation but could not make out the words. After a few minutes, Cord shook Hank's hand and returned to where Sarah waited. "Good news?" she asked. "Very good," Cord said with a grin. "They need experienced hands, and they are willing to pay decent wages. I start tomorrow. Nine. "That is wonderful," Sarah said, and she meant it. She was happy for him, even though part of her realized this meant he would be moving out of the boarding house and onto the ranch. "They have got a bunkhouse for the hands," Cord said as they walked back to his horse. "But Hank said I could stay in town if I prefer, as long as I am here by dawn." I told him I would think about it. He helped Sarah back onto the horse, and they started the ride back to Del Rio. True to his word, Cord took the long way around, following a winding trail that led past a small creek shaded by cottonwood trees. "This is beautiful," Sarah said as they paused to let the horse drink. "I thought you might like it," Cord said. He dismounted and helped Sarah down, then led the horse to the water's edge. Sarah walked along the creek bank, enjoying the relative coolness beneath the trees. It was so peaceful here, so far removed from the constant demands of the boarding house. She could not remember the last time she had just stopped to enjoy being somewhere. "Sure, Sarah, Cord said, coming to stand beside her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you work so hard? I mean, I understand about needing money and supporting your brother. But there must be other ways, easier ways to make a living." Sarah sighed. "Like what?" "Get married to the first man who asks whether I love him or not, just so I have someone to take care of me. I have had offers, but I will not marry without love. And as for other work, there is not much available for women in Del Rio. I could work at one of the saloons, but that comes with expectations I'm not willing to meet. Mrs. Henderson treats me fairly and lets me bring Tommy his meals. It is hard work, but it is honest work, and I can live with that." Cord nodded slowly. "I respect that. But you are going to work yourself to death if you keep going like this." "Nah." "What choice do I have?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "The world is not kind to women alone. I do what I have to do to survive." "I know," Cord said gently. "I am not criticizing you. I just wish things were different for you." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine concern in his eyes. It had been so long since someone had cared about her well-being, had asked about her life not out of nosiness, but out of real interest. She felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back angrily. "I am sorry," Cord said. "I did not mean to upset you." "You did not," Sarah said. "I am just not used to people asking about me. Most folks do not notice I exist beyond the meals I cook and the clothes I wash." "Then they are fools," Cord said. "You are one of the most remarkable women I have ever met, Sarah Mitchell." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "You barely know me. I know you work harder than any person should have to. I know you are raising your brother alone and doing a good job of it from what I can see. I know you are kind enough to offer a room to a stranger, and brave enough to wash laundry by the river at midnight. That is more than enough to form an opinion." Sarah did not know what to say to that. She turned away, looking at the creek, trying to compose herself. Cord moved closer, and she could feel the warmth of him beside her. "I should get back," she said finally. "I have got work to do." "Of course," Cord said. "Thank you for coming with me today. It meant a lot." They rode back to Del Rio in comfortable silence, Sarah's arms wrapped around Cord's waist, her head resting against his back. She felt something shifting inside her, something she had kept locked away for years. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When they reached the boarding house, Cord helped Sarah dismount, his hands lingering on her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "I have decided to stay at the boarding house rather than the ranch," he said. "If that is all right with you." "It is not up to me," Sarah said. "You will have to ask Mrs. Henderson." "I am asking you," Cord said. "Would it be all right with you?" Sarah met his eyes and saw the question behind the question. "Yes," she said softly. "It would be all right with me." Neanne Cord smiled, and Sarah felt her heart lift in response. He went to find Mrs. Henderson to arrange for an extended stay, and Sarah returned to her work with a lightness she had not felt in years. And over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Cord would leave before dawn to ride out to the Brennan Ranch, work a long day with the cattle, and return to the boarding house in time for dinner. Most evenings after Sarah had cleaned up from the meal, Cord would help her carry laundry down to the river. He never complained, never acted as though it was beneath him. He just showed up and helped, standing guard while she worked or sometimes helping with the scrubbing when the load was particularly heavy. They talked about everything during those nights by the river. Cord told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen, and the people he had met. Sarah shared her dreams she had not admitted to anyone before, about maybe one day opening her own restaurant or dress shop, about giving Tommy the chance to go to school instead of working at the livery. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sarah felt herself falling in love. It was in the way Cord looked at her when she brought him coffee in the morning, as though she was the best thing he had seen all day. It was in the way he remembered small things she mentioned, like her fondness for wild roses, and showed up one evening with a bouquet he had picked. It was in the way he treated her brother Tommy, with respect and patience, teaching him how to handle a rope and care for horses properly. Tommy, for his part, had taken to Cord immediately. The boy was hungry for male guidance, and Cord filled that role naturally, never talking down to him or dismissing his questions. Sarah would watch them together and feel her heart swell with affection for this man who had ridden into her life by chance. But Sarah was also afraid. She had built her life around work and survival, around being strong and independent. Letting someone in, depending on someone else, felt dangerous. What if Cord left? What if this was just a temporary stop for him, one more town in a long line of towns? Her fears came to a head one evening about a month after Cord had arrived in Del Rio. They were at the river as usual, Sarah washing and Cord keeping watch, when he said, I have been thinking about something." "And then, what?" Sarah asked, scrubbing at a stubborn stain. None about us is." And Sarah's hands stilled in the water. "What about us?" "Sarah, look at me." She turned reluctantly, and Cord moved closer, kneeling down beside her on the riverbank. In the moonlight, his face was serious, almost nervous. "I know I have only been here a short while," he said, "but I feel like I have known you forever. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and it is because of you. I look forward to coming back to the boarding house every evening, not because of the bed or the food, but because I know you will be there. I love talking to you, working beside you, just being near you. I'm trying to say that I have fallen in love with you, Sarah Mitchell, and I'm hoping you might feel the same way about me." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Cord, I do not know what to say." "Say you feel something for me too," Cord said, "or say you do not, but please say something because I am terrified right now." Despite her confusion, Sarah found herself smiling. "You are terrified? I am the one who does not know which way is up anymore. I have been so focused on just surviving for so long that I forgot what it was like to feel anything else. Then you showed up, asking me questions nobody else bothers to ask, helping me with work nobody else would touch, and I do not know what to do with these feelings. Yes, I care about you. I think about you constantly. But I'm also scared, Cord. What if you decide to move on? What if this is just another stop on your way to somewhere else? It is not, Cord said firmly. I have been drifting for years, looking for something without knowing what it was. Now I know. I was looking for home, and I found it here with you. I am not going anywhere, Sarah, not unless you want me to. I do not want you to, Sarah whispered. I want you to stay. I think I'm falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me. Cord reached out and took her wet hands in his, heedless of the cold water. Then let us be terrified together. We do not have to rush anything. We can take this as slow as you need. I just needed you to know how I feel. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the way Cord held hers so gently despite the rough calluses on his palms. Then she looked up at his face, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, and she made a decision. She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, gentle press of lips that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Cord made a small surprise sound, then kissed her back, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. It was Sarah's first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Well, Cord said, a smile spreading across his face, that was worth waiting for. Sarah laughed, feeling giddy and lightheaded. We should finish the laundry. We absolutely should, Cord agreed, but neither of them moved. They just sat there, holding hands and smiling at each other like fools, until Sarah finally forced herself to return to work. The rest of the evening passed in a happy haze. They finished the laundry together, talking about the future in tentative, careful terms. Cord wanted to save money from his ranch work, maybe eventually buy a small piece of land where he could raise horses. Sarah admitted she had always wanted to have a real home, a place that was hers with a garden and maybe some chickens. We could do that together, Beast Marine Cord said. If you wanted. Maybe, Sarah said, but she was smiling. Let us see how things go. Over the next several months, their relationship deepened and grew. Cord continued working at the Brennan Ranch and staying at the boarding house. He had become a fixture there, and the other boarders had grown accustomed to seeing him help Sarah with her endless chores. Mrs. Henderson watched the romance bloom with maternal approval, often shooing Sarah out of the kitchen to spend time with Cord. Tommy, too, was thrilled about the relationship. He had taken to calling Cord his friend, and Sarah could see how much her brother had blossomed under Cord's mentorship. The boy was more confident now, more skilled with horses, and he had started talking about maybe becoming a ranch hand himself one day. As autumn arrived and the brutal Texas heat finally began to ease, Cord told Sarah he had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land just outside Del Rio. It was only 10 acres, but it had a creek running through it and enough grazing for a few horses. Come see it with me, he said one Sunday afternoon when Sarah finally had a few hours free. They rode out together and Sarah fell in love with the property immediately. It was rough and wild, but she could see the potential. There was a spot near the creek where a house could be built, sheltered by old cottonwood trees. The land rolled gently, covered in prairie grass that turned golden in the afternoon sun. What do you think? Cord asked, watching her face anxiously. I think it is perfect, Sarah said honestly. What are you going to do with it? That depends, Cord said. He dismounted and helped Sarah down, then led her to a flat rock overlooking the creek. They sat down together and Cord took her hand. Sarah, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You are the strongest, kindest, most amazing woman I have ever met. I bought this land thinking about our future, about building a life here together. I know we have not been courting for very long, but I know my own heart. I want to marry you, Sarah. I want to build a house on this land and fill it with love and laughter and maybe someday children. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to share your burdens and your joys, to work beside you and rest with you. Will you marry me? Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. 6 months ago, she had been alone and exhausted, working herself to the bone with no hope for anything better. Now she was sitting in the sunshine with a man who loved her, being offered a future she had never dared to dream about. Yes, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Cord let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. Then he kissed her, long and deep, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 6 weeks later in November of 1882 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Del Rio. Sarah wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, pale yellow calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Cord wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and when Sarah walked down the aisle to meet him, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Tommy stood as Cord's best man, beaming with pride and excitement. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. A few of the boarders had come, along with some of the men from the Brennan Ranch, and the little church felt full and warm. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Cord kissed Sarah with such tenderness that she forgot anyone else was in the room. They were married, bound together, and Sarah felt a sense of peace and rightness settle over her. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Henderson outdoing herself on the food. There was roasted chicken and beef, fresh baked bread, vegetables from the garden, and 3 different kinds of pie. The boarders played fiddle and guitar, and Cord danced with Sarah in the parlor, holding her close and whispering in her ear about how much he loved her. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. She and Cord would be spending their wedding night in his room at the boarding house before moving to their land the next day. Cord had been working on building a small cabin there, getting it ready for them with help from Tommy and some of the ranch hands. When they finally climbed the stairs to Cord's room, Sarah's heart was pounding. Cord seemed to sense her nervousness because he took her hands and said, "Well, we do not have to do anything you are not ready for. We can just sleep or talk or whatever you want." "I want to be your wife in every way," Sarah said softly. "I'm just a little scared." "So am I," Cord admitted. "But we will figure it out together just like we do everything else." He kissed her gently, and Sarah felt her nervousness fade, replaced by a warm anticipation. Cord was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and loved. Their wedding night was not perfect in a technical sense, both of them fumbling and uncertain at times, but it was perfect in the way that mattered. They came together with love and trust, and when Sarah finally fell asleep in Cord's arms, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The next morning, they loaded their belongings onto a wagon that Cord had borrowed from the ranch and said goodbye to Mrs. Henderson and the boarding house that had been Sarah's home for the past 3 years. Mrs. Henderson hugged Sarah tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You come visit me, you hear?" the older woman said. "And if you ever need anything at all, you send word." "I will," Sarah promised. "Thank you for everything. You gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go." "Nun, you earned every bit of what you got," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Now go on. Go be happy with that good man of yours." Tommy rode alongside the wagon on a horse Cord had bought for him, talking excitedly about the cabin and the work they would do on the land. When they finally reached their property, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The cabin was small but sturdy, built from local timber with a stone fireplace and a covered porch. Cord had made shutters for the windows and a solid door with a real lock. Inside, there was one large room with a sleeping area curtained off at one end, a kitchen area with a cook stove Cord had somehow acquired, and a table with 4 chairs that he had built himself. "It is not much yet," Cord said, watching Sarah's face anxiously. But we can add on as we need to. Maybe another room or two, a bigger porch. It is perfect, Sarah said, and she meant it. This was theirs, truly theirs, and that made it more precious than the finest mansion. So I love it. And they spent the rest of the day settling in, unpacking their few belongings, and making the cabin into a home. Tommy helped enthusiastically, though he would be staying at the boarding house and continuing to work at the livery for now. Cord had offered to let him move in with them, but Tommy had insisted they needed time alone as newlyweds. He would visit often, he promised, and maybe in a year or two when he was older he could work on the ranch with Cord. As the sun began to set, Tommy rode back to town, and Sarah and Cord were left alone in their new home. They made dinner together, or rather Sarah cooked, while Cord set the table and kept her company, stealing kisses when she got close enough. They ate by lamplight, talking about their plans for the property, and then Cord led Sarah outside to watch the stars come out. They stood on the porch, Cord's arms wrapped around Sarah from behind, and looked out over their land. The night was clear and cool, the sky full of stars, and Sarah felt a sense of contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "Are you happy?" Cord asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah admitted. "Sometimes I worry I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "And Anne, it is not a dream," Cord said. "This is real. We are real, and we are going to build an amazing life here together." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I say it enough, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Cord said. "More than words can say." He kissed her, and Sarah melted into him, grateful for this man who had appeared by the river that night and changed her entire world. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Building a life from scratch never is. They worked from dawn until dusk every day, Cord at the ranch, and then on their own land in the evenings, Sarah managing the household and starting a small garden. Money was tight, and there were times when Sarah worried about making ends meet, but they had each other, and that made all the difference. Cord proved to be as good as his word about wanting to raise horses. He bought a mare heavy with foal, and when she gave birth in the spring, Cord was as excited as a child. The foal was a beautiful bay colt, and Cord spent hours working with it, gentling it, training it. He had a gift with horses, a patience and understanding that Sarah admired. By their first anniversary, they had 3 horses, a small flock of chickens, and a much larger garden. Cord had built an addition onto the cabin, giving them a separate bedroom and a small room that could serve as a spare or, as Cord had hinted, with a meaningful look, a nursery someday. Sarah had not gotten pregnant yet, though not for lack of trying. She tried not to worry about it, but as the months passed, she found herself wondering if something was wrong with her. Cord assured her that these things took time, that they were young and had years ahead of them, but Sarah could not help feeling disappointed each month when her courses came. In the fall of 1883, nearly a year after their wedding, Sarah finally got her wish. She realized she had missed her monthly bleeding and felt a flutter of hope. She waited another month to be sure, and then she told Cord one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am with child," she said simply. Cord turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." Cord let out a shout of joy and pulled her into his arms, being careful not to squeeze too tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Sarah, we are going to have a baby." "We are?" Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Her happy does not even begin to cover it," Cord said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. We cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Cord worried constantly about her. He insisted on taking over more of the household chores despite still working long hours at the ranch. Tommy visited often, excited about becoming an uncle, and even Mrs. Henderson rode out several times to check on Sarah and bring food. As Sarah's belly grew, Cord became increasingly protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, riding horses, or working too hard in the garden. Sarah found his hovering both endearing and exasperating, but she understood it came from love. Their son was born in June of 1884, a squalling, red-faced baby with a remarkable set of lungs. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the local midwife, and there were moments when Sarah was certain she would not survive. But she did, and when the midwife placed the baby in her arms, Sarah felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. Cord cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and toes. They named him Daniel, after Cord's father, and he became the center of their world. Those early months with a newborn were exhausting. Daniel was colicky and fussy, rarely sleeping for more than a few hours at a time. Sarah and Cord took turns walking him, rocking him, singing to him, doing whatever it took to soothe him. Sarah was often so tired she could barely think straight, but every time she looked at her son's face, she felt a surge of love that made it all worthwhile. Cord was an involved father, never complaining about the dirty diapers or the sleepless nights. He would come home from the ranch exhausted and still take Daniel so Sarah could rest. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving little horses into the headboard, and he sang lullabies to Daniel every night in his deep, rumbling voice. As Daniel grew from an infant into a toddler, the Cordell family flourished. Cord's horse breeding was becoming successful, with people coming from surrounding towns to buy his well-trained animals. Sarah had turned her garden into something impressive, providing not only for their family but extra produce that she sold in Del Rio. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Tommy had moved out to the ranch to work full-time when he turned 17, and he was thriving under Cord's mentorship. He had become a skilled horseman and cowboy, earning respect from the other ranch hands despite his youth. He visited Sarah and Cord regularly, clearly doting on his nephew. When Daniel was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1886, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the creek, and she was the spitting image of Sarah with dark curly hair and blue eyes. If Daniel had been a fussy baby, Rose was his opposite. She was sunny and content, rarely crying, and she slept well almost from the beginning. Cord joked that God had taken pity on them and given them an easy baby after Daniel's difficult infancy. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the horse breeding business expanded, and Sarah and Cord's love for each other only deepened with time. They had their challenges, of course. There were drought years when money was tight and illnesses that scared them, and disagreements about how to handle various situations, but they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. One evening when Daniel was 5 and Rose was 3, Sarah found herself at the creek doing laundry. It was not midnight this time, but early evening, and she was not alone. Cord was with her, helping with the washing while the children played nearby, Daniel showing Rose how to skip stones across the water. Sarah paused in her work and looked around, taking in the scene. Her husband, her children, the land they had built their life on. She thought back to that night nearly 5 years ago when she had been washing laundry alone at midnight, exhausted and hopeless, wondering if her life would ever be more than just endless work. Cord noticed her expression and came over, placing a wet hand on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That night when we met," Sarah said. "When you asked me when I ever rested." "I remember," Cord said softly. "You looked so tired, so worn down. I wanted to help you even though I did not know you." "You did help me," Sarah said. "You gave me a life I never thought I could have, a home, a family, love. You taught me that rest is not just about sleeping. It is about peace, about being content with where you are and who you are with. You gave me the same thing, Cord said. I was drifting before I met you, looking for something I could not name. You were my home, Sarah. You still are. Sarah reached up and placed her hand over his. Do you think we will always be this happy? I think we will have hard times, Cord said honestly. Life is not perfect, but I think as long as we face those times together, we will come through all right. And yes, I think we will be happy. How could I not be with you by my side? They watched their children play, Rose's laughter ringing out as Daniel helped her send a stone skipping across the water. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her for the twists of fate that had brought Cord to that river on that particular night, for the courage she had found to open her heart to love, for every moment that had led them to this place. The years continued to pass. Daniel grew into a thoughtful boy with his father's way with horses and his mother's determination. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions, always exploring. Sarah and Cord added another room to the cabin as the children grew, and then another. When Daniel was 8 and Rose was 6, Sarah found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy came as a surprise, as they had thought their family was complete, but it was a welcome one. In the winter of 1889, they had another son whom they named Thomas after Sarah's brother, though they called him Tommy from the start. The children were a handful, keeping Sarah busy from dawn until dusk, but she had learned to accept help when it was offered. Cord was always there, taking the children out to work with the horses or teach them to ride, giving Sarah time to herself. Tommy, now a grown man of 22 and married himself, visited often with his wife Margaret, and the cousins played together while the adults talked. Mrs. Henderson passed away when Sarah's oldest was 9, and Sarah grieved for the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most. They named their next daughter, born in 1891, Helen after Mrs. Henderson, whose first name they learned only after her death. With 4 children, the cabin that had once seemed spacious was now bursting at the seams. Cord and some of the men from the ranch spent a summer building a proper house, 2 stories with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for everyone. Sarah cried when she saw it completed, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that tiny cabin they had started in. The horse breeding business had become quite successful. Cord had a reputation for producing quality animals, and people came from as far as San Antonio to buy from him. He had hired 2 men to help with the work, and he was able to spend more time with his family. Sarah had started a small business of her own, selling preserves and baked goods in Del Rio. Her pies were particularly popular, and she had more orders than she could fill some weeks. The children helped as they got older, Daniel and Rose learning to make deliveries into town. One evening in the summer of 1895, Sarah and Cord sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sun set over their land. The children were inside getting ready for bed, their voices drifting out through the open windows. Sarah was 42 now, Cord was 45, and they had been married for nearly 13 years. Do you ever miss the excitement of your drifting days? Sarah asked me, seeing new places, having adventures. Cord thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. Not even a little bit. This is my adventure, Sarah, building this life with you, raising our children, working this land. I have seen more sunsets from this porch than I saw in all my years of traveling, and every one of them is special because I am watching it with you. Sarah reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. I never thanked you properly for that night at the river. You did not need to, Cord said. Loving you has been all the thanks I ever needed. I was so stubborn, Sarah said with a laugh. I told you to go away, that I had work to do. And I ignored you, Cord said with a grin. Best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Inside, they could hear Daniel reading to his younger siblings, his voice patient and clear. Sarah thought about the boy she had been raising alone, barely surviving, and the man he was becoming, confident and kind. She thought about her other children, each one a blessing, each one thriving in the life she and Cord had built. "When do you ever rest yourself, Renee?" Cord said suddenly, echoing the question that had started everything. Sarah looked over at him, puzzled. "What?" "That was the first thing I said to you," Cord reminded her. "When do you ever rest yourself?" "I have been thinking about it lately. You're still working hard, maybe not quite as hard as you were back then, but you're always doing something. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, running your business, so I'm asking again, when do you rest?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I rest every night when I fall asleep next to you. I rest when I sit on this porch and watch our children play. I rest when we eat dinner together as a family. I rest in the moments of peace and joy that happen every single day. I am not washing laundry at midnight anymore, Cord. I am living a life full of love and purpose. That is rest enough for me." Cord squeezed her hand. "You are an amazing woman, Sarah Cordell. Have I told you that lately?" "Not in the past few hours," Sarah teased. "I was starting to wonder if you still thought so." "I will always think so," Cord said seriously. "Until my dying day and beyond, I will think you are the most amazing woman who ever lived." The stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the girl she had been, working herself to exhaustion with no hope for a better future. She thought about the night a stranger on horseback had stopped to ask her a simple question, a question that had changed everything. "When do you ever rest yourself?" She had found her answer in the most unexpected way. Rest was not about stopping work. It was about finding work that mattered, work that fed your soul rather than draining it. It was about building a life with someone you loved, creating a home, raising children who would carry your values into the future. Sarah had worked hard every day of her marriage, but it felt different from those years at the boarding house. Now she was working for her family, for their future, and that made all the difference. She had found her rest in motion, in the rhythm of a life well lived, in the love of a good man and the laughter of her children. The years continued to flow like the river where they had met. Daniel grew into a fine young man and took over much of the horse breeding business, allowing Cord to slow down a bit as he aged. He married a sweet girl from town named Emma, and they built a house on the far end of the property. Sarah and Cord's first grandchild, a boy named James, after his grandfather, was born when Sarah was 50 years old. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school in Del Rio, where she taught children to read and write and do arithmetic. She married a shopkeeper named Michael, and they had 3 daughters in quick succession, keeping Sarah busy with granddaughtering duties. Young Tommy followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled horseman, and eventually joining Daniel in running the breeding operation. Helen, the youngest, surprised everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a doctor. Sarah and Cord supported her dream, and she went off to medical school in Galveston, returning years later to set up a practice in Del Rio. As Sarah and Cord grew older, they found themselves with more time to simply be together. They took long walks along the creek, rode out to watch the sunset from different vantage points on their land, and spent quiet evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. Cord's hair had gone completely gray, and Sarah's dark curls were streaked with silver. They both moved a bit slower than they once had, and there were aches and pains that came with age, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, seasoned by years of partnership and shared experience. One evening in the fall of 1910, nearly 30 years after they had first met, Sarah and Cord found themselves back at the original creek where Cord had first seen Sarah washing laundry. They had ridden out together on a warm afternoon, taking their time, enjoying the familiar landscape. They dismounted by the creek and sat on the bank, their feet dangling in the cool water. Sarah was 62 now, Cord was 65, and they had lived a lifetime together. "Do you remember the first time we came here after we were married?" Sarah asked. You proposed to me right over there on that flat rock? None, I remember, Cord said. I was so nervous I thought I might be sick. I had this whole speech planned out, but when I looked at you, all I could think was that I loved you and wanted to spend my life with you. It was perfect, Sarah said. Miss, you were perfect. Well, I was terrified, Cord admitted. What if you had said no? I could never have said no, Sarah said. You saved me, Cord. Not just from hard work and poverty, though you did that too. You saved me from a life without love, without hope. You showed me what it meant to be truly happy. You saved me right back, Cord said. I was lost before I met you, Sarah. I did not know it at the time, but I was. You gave me purpose, direction, a reason to put down roots. You gave me a family and a home. You gave me everything. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek burble over the stones and the wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves. Sarah leaned her head on Cord's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. I have been thinking about that night we met, Cord said. About how easily it might never have happened. If I had made camp an hour earlier, if I had taken a different road, if you had finished your laundry before I rode by, there are so many ways we might have missed each other. But we did not, Sarah said firmly. We found each other. Maybe it was fate or God or just pure luck, but we found each other and we built something beautiful together. We did, Cord agreed, and I would not change a single moment of it. Well, maybe I would have liked to spare you some of the hard times, the years when money was tight and we were struggling. Those times made us stronger, Sarah said. They taught us to appreciate what we have. I would not change anything either, Cord. Not one single thing. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah thought about the life they had built together. 4 children, all grown and happy, pursuing their own dreams, a thriving business that Daniel and Tommy now ran, a beautiful home on land they owned outright, grandchildren who filled their days with laughter and love. She thought about the girl she had been, washing bloody sheets at midnight, exhausted and hopeless. That girl could never have imagined this life, could never have dreamed that asking a simple question would lead to such happiness. When do you ever rest yourself? Sarah finally had her answer, one she had lived rather than simply spoken. She rested in love, in family, in the satisfaction of a life well lived. She rested in the arms of a man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. She rested in the knowledge that she had built something lasting, something that would continue long after she was gone. See, we should head back, Cord said as the sky darkened. The grandchildren are coming for dinner, and they will wonder where we are? In a minute, Sarah said. Let us just sit here a bit longer. So they sat by the creek as night fell. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of love and purpose. They had worked hard, laughed often, cried sometimes, and loved always. They had raised children and built businesses and weathered storms, both literal and figurative. And through it all, they had rested in each other, finding peace not in the absence of work, but in the presence of love. As they finally stood to make their way back to their horses, Cord pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her, gentle and sweet. I love you, he said. I have loved you from that first night by the river, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Sarah said. Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for asking when I ever rested. Thank you for caring enough to change my life. Thank you for letting me, Cord said. They rode home together in the gathering darkness, side by side as they had been for nearly 30 years. The house was lit up when they arrived, windows glowing warmly, and they could hear the sounds of their family inside. Children laughing, adults talking, the clatter of dishes being set on the table. Sarah and Cord paused on the porch, looking at each other in the lamplight spilling out from inside. Without words, they both understood what the other was thinking. This was what they had built together. This warmth, this love, this family. It had all started with a question by a river at midnight, and it had grown into something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. Hand in hand, they walked into their home, into the embrace of their family, into the life they had created together. And Sarah Mitchell Cordell, who had once worked herself to exhaustion with no hope for a better future, finally and completely understood what it meant to rest. The years that followed were golden ones. Sarah and Cord grew old together gracefully, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They remained active in their community, Sarah with her charitable work and Cord with his horses, but they also took time to simply enjoy each other's company. On Sarah's 70th birthday, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren came from near and far, filling the house with noise and laughter. After dinner, Daniel stood up to make a toast. "To my mother," he said, raising his glass. "The strongest woman I know. She taught us to work hard, to be honest, to care for others, but most importantly, she taught us about love. The love she and our father share has been the foundation of our family, and we are all blessed because of it." Everyone cheered and drank, and Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. Cord squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw that his eyes were misty too. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Sarah and Cord sat on their porch one more time. It had become their ritual, this evening time together, and they rarely missed it. 70 years old, Sarah mused. I never thought I would live this long, and I certainly never thought I would be this happy. You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Cord said. And I plan to spend however many years we have left making you even happier. Nina, you have already given me more than I ever dreamed of, Friar, Sarah said. It's a lifetime of love, a family I adore, a home that fills my heart. What more could I possibly want? More time, Cord said quietly. I want more time with you, Sarah. I know we cannot live forever, but I am greedy. I want every moment I can get. Then we will take every moment we are given, Sarah said, and we will fill them with love, just as we always have. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. The years had been kind to them, giving them health and happiness and a family that would carry on their legacy. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Cord's arms as she had been for nearly 40 years, she thought one last time about that question that had started it all. When do you ever rest yourself? She rested now, every night, every day, in every moment of her beautiful, full, love-filled life. She rested in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished. She rested in the satisfaction of a life well lived. She rested in the arms of the man who had seen her struggling by the river at midnight and cared enough to stop, to ask, to love, and that, Sarah thought as sleep claimed her, was the best rest of all. Description: When Sarah Mitchell scrubs laundry at midnight by the Rio Grande in 1882, exhausted from endless work at a Texas boarding house, a cowboy named James Cordell stops to ask a simple question that changes everything. Their chance meeting by the river sparks an unexpected romance that transforms two lost souls into partners for life. Through hardship and triumph, they build a thriving horse ranch, raise a family, and discover that true rest comes not from stopping work, but from finding work worth doing alongside someone you love. Discover how one midnight encounter leads to a lifetime of love in the Wild West.